Today we're going to change the valve cover gasket and the spark plug rings on a 2003 Jetta GLI. This has the 2.8 liter VR6 24 valve, and it needs the valve cover gasket and the spark plug rings replaced. They're probably not that bad today, but I'll show you in another video where I took that cover off and there was oil in here, and then as I pulled the coils out, each one was soaked in oil. Oh, that is just terrible. There's so much oil everywhere. And yep, it's completely drenched in oil when it comes out. That's how much oil is in there. 3, I did the same thing. Yep, covered in oil. So here we go with number 4. Let's pull this one out and see if it's covered in oil. It is. So I couldn't find any videos of people doing this project on a 24 valve VR6. Most of them are doing it on the 12 valve. FCP Euro did it on a Mark V R32. So that's going to be a little different than this, but I think once we get the front bumper off, everything after that will be pretty much the same as doing it on the Mark V R32. I've taken the R32 bumper off a ton of times. I've never taken the front end off the Jetta. So here are the parts we're going to be replacing. This is the valve cover gasket. This is the intake manifold gasket. And these are the rings that go around the 6 holes in the spark plugs. That's why they're filling up with oil. So to get started, we put the car up on blocks. We didn't raise it off the ground. We just need room to get our hands in here to take these fasteners out. So the first step's removing the grill. On the R32 it would be screwed in, but on this one you just pull up on these corners and you can pry the tabs out. And then you'll undo this hood latch here. You flip this up and you can put a screwdriver in here and twist it and it'll pop that open. So once you get that off of that little bar, the grill should just pull right up. So there are 5 T30 Torx screws behind the front grille that you'll have to take off to get the bumper cover off. Next you're going to remove the Torx screws for the bumper cover in front of the wheel. So on my car underneath I only have 1 screw on the passenger side here to take off to remove the bumper cover. On the driver's side it's ripped off. So on my Mark V R32 these lower grills would have screws in them, but on this car they just have these little tabs and all you have to do is pull down on them a little bit and it'll come right out. So you just come over here to this tab, push down, and there you go. And then there's one more torque bit on this side and same thing on the other side. So once your bumper is hanging down and you can get your hand back here, you pull on these lights to remove them and just pull it out. So you remove these top bolts for the bumper support. So there are 2 more screws, 1 at each corner of the fenders, T30s. And once you have those out, it should tip forward. So this is the part where we can go in a couple different directions. I'm going to try to do it leaving the radiator all connected. Some people disconnect everything on the right side and swing one end of it out so you'd have more room. I think we'll be able to gain enough room to get to the bolt. Just because it's simpler for me, I'm going to start on this side. You have a bolt here and then 1 more here holding this black bracket on. So I took the 2 10mm bolts out and that moves this bracket so you can get these wires out of the way. So on the right side of the engine, the rear screw was a 5mm Allen key and the front screw was this weird shape, and I just used a 7mm regular socket. So I pulled off all the wires for the ignition coils, laid those to the side. I was getting ready to take the intake manifold off. I pulled the strut tower brace off and I was looking at the back. There's 1 bolt on the back for the intake manifold right here. And then I noticed this line, it's like a vacuum line. There's some hose on the end of there, but that's broken. And then I came up here, and this little plastic line here that does the 90 went to down there with this little bit of hose, and that's broken. And this is before I flopped everything up and out of the way. Then we disconnected the PCV breather hose. We're going to go ahead and start taking the intake manifold off. We have 2 more 6mm Allen screws up here, and then we have 9 bolts up here. So we're going to take these 2 out next. So I've got the 2 side bolts out. The radiator support's only held on by the bottom 2 bolts. We're going to remove this one, set it down on the blocks. That way we can slide it forward so we have more room to get in here. So we're getting there. We have 6 out. We have another one out, but we dropped that one in there somewhere. It's a little tough because all of the Allen key holes are full of oil and dirt, so the Allen key doesn't really want to go in. It's tough to find where they are. So I've got all 9 bolts out. I've only got 8 of them in there. This one on the bottom is in there somewhere. I think we have 2 brackets, one for the dipstick and one for those sensors. I can't really see it. So I've got the intake manifold removed. It's still connected to the back on a couple of those lines. The trick was taking the throttle body off. You can't do it without taking the throttle body off. Now, FCP Euro, their how-to says you need to take the coil packs out because they'll hold this up. We didn't take the coil packs out. So the bad part is, every other runner is pretty gooped up. Okay, so it was just too difficult to clean the intake on the car, so I figured out how to get those lines off. So I cleaned up the intake manifold. I got most of the carbon out. So I cleaned the top of the engine off with engine degreaser. Drain the oil. Gonna put the new filter in. So I've got the new oil filter on. Put the drain plug back in. So I've got 4 of the intake manifold holes on the engine clean. You can see the last 2 are still dirty with carbon buildup and oil. These ones are all nice and smooth. I can reach my fingers in and feel around. We were just spraying paper towels with brake clean, putting that in, so we're pulling it out. So we're cleaning the last intake port, getting the carbon out. Next thing we have to do is remove the valve cover. Pull all the coil packs out. We have them numbered left to right. So which one was number 6? It would be this one. Well, I guess they all have a notch. No? See?
Yeah, they're real screwed up looking down.
So I've got the valve cover off. The gasket broke out because it's all brittle and plastic. Got the spark plug rings out. Now we're going to clean it up and put the new gaskets in and then clean this up. So I've got all the new spark plug rings and the new gasket on. Put the bolts in. Now we're going to put it back on. So I've got the valve cover back on with the new gasket and new spark plug rings. The next thing I'm going to do is pull all the spark plugs, let the oil drain down, put the spark plugs back in, put all the coil packs back on, and then I just have to wait for this new hose to ship in. Closest one's Arizona, so it'll be a couple days before we can get it put back together. So we're going to pull this old gasket out. So I've got the new intake manifold gasket in, got everything cleaned up. We're going to go ahead and put it back on. So I've got the intake manifold tightened down, probably over tightened because I didn't have a torque wrench. Next we're going to put the side bolts in, that one there, and start reconnecting the lines. We're going to reattach the vacuum canister and the dipstick, and then when we get this coolant hose, we'll just detach the vacuum canister, move it out of the way so we can get to it. This is where labeling the bolts comes in handy. We have our intake side bolts, the bracket on the back of the intake that we had to loosen up, and the bolt for the rear of the intake manifold. So I've got everything back together. I just have to add oil. And I did notice it's low on power steering fluid too. So my new theory on this car is that it was well cared for but poorly maintained. Because they didn't really do all the oil changes and keep up on the power steering fluid, but they kept it clean inside. So we're going to do the first startup since we changed the valve cover and the oil. We disconnected the battery to see if it resets the check engine light if it comes back. It hasn't been ran in probably about a week, So the leak was right in here. It's like a hard plastic, like this ribbed plastic, but it's not the same as like this ribbed plastic. So we'll start it up and see if it leaks again. So I've done 104 miles since our valve cover change, and everything seems to be good. There's no leaks, or I fixed that vacuum leak after the first startup. We just put some tape over that line. It was a pretty hard to find line, these evap lines. So that's fine with the tape, no more leak in there. I haven't pulled any coil packs yet to see if there's oil on them. I'll probably drive it a little bit longer. We do have to go get some power steering fluid today. Eventually we'll get this Jetta in good condition. When I bought the R32 from the VW dealership, the AC didn't work and we fixed all that, so we'll fix this one too.